In the last few years of his life, Bob was demoralised by the death of his beloved wife and muse, Arlen Riley Wilson, and the return of his agonising and crippling polio symptoms. In November 2004, I wanted to get Ken and Bob together for one last time, but Ken balked at the prospect of flying to California. The next best thing was to film Ken at his home in Essex and take that film to Bob in Santa Cruz. Bob was a wonderful host, buoyed up by the visit and the prospect of a revival of Illuminatus, which was mooted at the time. But he was reluctant to grant an interview in his frail condition. On the 11th of November 2004, the last day of my visit, he finally relented. "I'd better put my teeth in," he said. I first asked him if, like William Burroughs, he had any advice for young people.
Yeah, don't give up.
Don't give up.
Yeah, young people tend to give up too easily.
Yeah.
They tend to think the world is against them, the world is hopeless and so on. The longer you live, the more you realize, how much they take away from you, there's something they can't take away. Hang on to what they can't take away and don't worry about the rest of it. That's my advice to young people. I was very suicidal in my 20s up until I got married, and I couldn't afford to be suicidal anymore. I tend to think all young people are suicidal, a lot of them are, especially since Judge Bush just won the election.
So marriage was one of the things that
in my case.
Yeah. Or a good partnership, shall we say.
A good partnership, yeah, let's be more general about it.
Yes, that's right. What would you say were the most important messages that people should get from your books?
If we all said maybe more often, the world might go stark, staring sane. Can you imagine Jerry Falwell going, maybe Jesus is the Son of God, and maybe he hates gay people as much as I do? Can you imagine every minaret in Islam where he's only with, maybe there is no God but Allah, and maybe Muhammad is his prophet? That would be the beginning of sanity, wouldn't it?
That would, yeah.
Okay, that's one of the ideas. Another idea is every power structure has bad communication. The only way to make our communication as accurate as possible, therefore make our behavior as intelligent as possible, is to spread information around, spread communication as much as possible. Everything that makes communication faster and more accessible, I regard as good. Everything that blocks communication, whether it's monopolies or censorship, I regard as bad. There's two major ideas in all my work anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, I feel I could think of two of them right away.
We've been talking over the last few days, and you've said that one of the most important developments is the internet.
You know, the internet is making it possible for more and more people to dialogue with more and more people. It seems to me that the wonderful ideas of anarchism in the 19th century about voluntary association, syndicates rather than coercion, all that is more and more happening on the internet. I think as time passes, we get more used to doing everything on the internet and ignoring the government until it goes away. I really think that's going to happen. And Buckminster Fuller thought so too, and he was no dumbbell.
Never to try to persuade anybody to, you don't try to sell anything. You see what needs to be done and you do it.
I started reading your books, I think, in my early 20s, and I think I was pretty suicidal as well at the time.
Yeah, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
A friend of mine told me once, everybody tries to commit suicide at 23. That was before I got fascinated by the number 23. Maybe he said 22, I'm not sure. You know, I remember 22 and 23, I thought the whole goddamn world was such a mess. What's the point of trying to do anything? I couldn't get a good job that I liked. I couldn't try, there's nothing in politics that seemed hopeful. The whole world seems to be ready to get ready for an atomic war.
Yeah.
And look at it now. It's not much better, but it's certainly not any worse. It just seems worse if you're new to it.
What I got from your books was a real sense of optimism, particularly books like Cosmic Trigger and Prometheus Rising gave me the message that change was possible. It was possible for me to change myself, and that I wouldn't be stuck in...
Yeah, I believe that. I believe we have more capacity for growth than we realize. Actually, we have more courage than we realize, too. Courage is very important in my philosophy. I don't think I emphasize it enough in my books. You gotta have the guts to go on struggling. When you do that, you find out it's easier than you thought. Or the hard parts aren't going to destroy you, they're just hard parts. People are too afraid of the world, I think, young people.
Yeah.
That's what I mean to convey, optimism and hope.
Yeah.
I'm saying something writing a book and tell people to be more pessimistic than they are already.
Yes.
What's the point of that? Most people are so damn pessimistic these days that they, you know, we live lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau said. Everybody's on one dope or another.
Yeah.
There's the legal ones and the illegal ones, but that's the only difference. Everybody's either on tranquilizers or pot or something or other.
Yeah.
The only way to survive this
Yeah.
brutal environment.
Certainly you gave me both the idea that it was possible to reprogram myself and some of the techniques of how to do so. And one of the reasons I wanted to come and say hello was to thank you, really.
Oh, thank you for traveling all this way to tell me.
But one of the things that impressed me the most was when I was really down a couple of years ago. You sent me an email. What you said was, always remember that every dark night of the soul is followed by a golden dawn.
I wrote that?
Yes.
Oh, that sounds rather extravagant for me. Oh, well, I guess if you say so, I must have written it.
You did, and it really meant something to me.
Yeah, well, that's true. The most common form of depression is the bipolar thing.
Yeah.
And it always ends, you know, it's just part of a cycle, and you can smooth out the cycle, so the rough parts are less rough, you know.
Yeah.
And as for the world situation, actually, most people in the world are better off than they ever were before. Really, they are.
Yeah.
Just read Dickens, just read Dostoevsky, read what things were like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Read Dante to find out things were like 600 years ago. And the poor are much better off than the poor were even 100 years, even in Roosevelt's day. Things are not all dark, it just seems that way from certain angles.
Yeah. And I don't know, as I've got older, I think I have changed and found ways to be pretty optimistic.
Oh, good. You're more creative if you're optimistic.
Just a couple of questions to end on about Illuminatus. I remember, I think you wrote in Cosmic Trigger that you took part in the production when it transferred to the Royal National Theatre.
Yeah.
And you took part in the Witches' Sabbath scene, is that right?
That's right, yeah, I was one of the people running around in robes, yeah.
And you took great delight, I think, in mooning the
I didn't
audience.
moon the audience. Heathcote Williams lifted my role from behind to moon the audience.
Did he?
Heathcote Williams, the playwright, actor, etc.
Yes. Have you any reminiscences of that production, and because you travelled to see it with Bob Shea as well?
That's right, yeah. Oh, I remember I liked Ken a lot. I liked Neil Cunningham who played Higbartine. I liked the whole cast. I liked the Pro.
Yeah.
I remember I gave an interview to one journal when I was stoned and I fell out. I said the next day I was astounded to see her, and the paper I was quoted as saying, "This has nothing to do with art. It's too late in the day for art. This is magic."
Yes.
I forgot I had said that. Boy, was I stoned when I said that.
Illuminatus is a very rich and complex book. Do you have any advice for people coming to it fresh who've never read your work before?
Read something else first. I'm very fond of Illuminatus. I like it a lot, but over the years I realized how hard it is for newcomers. Read an easier one of my books first to persuade yourself I'm worth reading, and then plunge into Illuminatus. And a lot of people plunged into Illuminatus and liked it, but still I keep hearing these complaints from people who can't figure out whose voice. I figure I changed the style for each speaker to know who's speaking, but most people don't listen that closely to what they're reading, so they don't know who's speaking.
Yeah.
If you read it out loud, I think you have a clear idea who's speaking in there, and I don't just change in paragraphs, sometimes I change in the middle of a sentence, you know, just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
If you follow the tones and the intonations, the vocabularies and so on, you'll know who's speaking, and then it's easier to follow. I'm not discouraging people from reading, I just mean if you do find it hard, read something easier by me. Try Schrödinger's Cat first.
Schrödinger's Cat, yeah, it's one of my
I better
favorites.
still try Prometheus Rising.
Yeah. And
Nobody had any trouble with that.
yeah, I'm very fond of Masks of the Illuminati as well.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
There's a scene with Einstein, Jung and Aleister Crowley towards the end, which is fantastic. And of course Ken Campbell, who adapted and directed the first production of Illuminatus, the stage production. He appears as a very minor character.
As a wrestler, as a matter of fact.
As a wrestler, yeah.
I wish he'd do a production of Master of the Illuminati. I always thought that would work on the stage better than very easily. It doesn't need much adaptation, really.
Well, his daughter Daisy is, as you know, working on a new production of Illuminatus.
Yeah, I know. I'm thrilled.